So yeah, thanks, Kevin, for your time and for agreeing to chat to me about I Am Loud. Just yeah, I love what you guys do, and I think, like I sort of said, return to form. I just absolutely love as a concept and as an idea and as a series of videos. And yeah, as a poet that isn't a big fan of form, it isn't like a natural friend of form. It's really, really helpful. So obviously your second series is kind of in the process of being released at the minute. What can we expect from it? What's coming up?
I really appreciate you saying that. It's exciting doing Return to Form. It was a real departure. I'm not someone who ever wrote in form. I came from like a performance background, and so I kind of had the idea. I like the title. A lot of the stuff is tongue in cheek, right? People kind of look at spoken word poets. It's like, well, it's not real poetry,
Yeah.
and I think it's a misunderstanding of like poets use spoken word poets use tons of form. It's just free form, right? You use
Yeah.
bits of everything you like. And so what we thought we would do is get a bunch of really talented writers who already do amazing writing and give them a new sort of a form and maybe a prompt or a restriction of some sort and see what they come up with based off the same thing. And it came through doing, trying to do things in the pandemic when we had the first lockdowns, trying to do something interesting with poets to not just kind of do online gigs that felt to me like it was just something lacking, whereas this was about doing something that you could only do because we were all trapped inside and we had more time to edit and things. And what we were really keen is coming back, we came back for Fringe there for live events. And what we really want to do is not abandon the digital space. There's this feel of, oh, we're back to normal. And I'm like, well, normal should change. And so doing season 2 Return to Form was a big thing for us. That we wanted to keep working hard on it. And we wanted to expand it out. So the first season looked at Scottish artists, so people working and writing in Scotland currently. And what we wanted to do is kind of reach out and bring in some UK poets. There's still a lot of, the majority is fantastic Scottish poets, but we wanted to kind of reach out. And that's partly to shine a bigger light on the Scottish spoken word scene, and sort of mix
Oh, you've just
those quotes.
Oh, sorry, you just froze for a second there. No, yeah, like the Scottish spoken word scene is so incredible. And like you had like people like Hannah and Courtney and Joe, who are all poets that like I'm really lucky to sort of like know them a bit, but they're just all amazing. And just when they're on stage and performing, it's just so transformative. Yeah, they're just all incredible. And yeah, what I really enjoyed was, you know, because I'm similar in that my background as a poet is slightly more performance, is slightly more that end of things. And although like I did English at uni, so I studied all these things, like I never understood them quite right. Like even things like meter, like I can do meter if it's for a spoken word piece because it's not meter so much as it is a rhythm. There's something slightly more musical about it. But like dactyls and like all these words, I study them and I have no idea what they are still. It's
it's a thing someone told me, a musician told me once, where it was like, and it's always sort of stuck with me, is there are some people who get the mechanics of the thing, and there's some people who just have an ear for it. Like the Beatles didn't know how to read or write sheet music, and they're arguably some of the greatest musicians to ever live. And yet there is, you can know the beat and tone of a thing. I imagine a lot of them, like Paul McCartney now probably reads and writes sheet music. It's like you can have good instincts and a good ear for something. You can know what sounds right, and that can take you so far. I think understanding the mechanics, like I was saying, most of the poets you'll find that they're already using internal rhyme, and they're using like alliteration, or they're using like refrains and sort of structural beats, that these building blocks of what make a poem kind of accidentally. And I think doing something like Return to Form, where it's teaching rather than through, like I never did any English or anything, like I didn't go to uni. So for me, like I learned best through YouTube videos, but that was the kind of idea, was like to demonstrate rather than kind of dryly recite, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's still the intention. And we've got some really, you highlighted the lineup, and like we've got an insane lineup for this one, and then it's the the forms as well that make it. Like I'm very excited to. It's my joy as a fan of poetry is getting to sit and pair people up and give them a task and be like, this will be wonderful. I'm very excited for Angie Strachan. I don't know if you know Angie.
No.
Angie is an amazing poet, really, really wild sense of humor about her, that West Coast, very like Scottish Glasgow accent. She's got videos out of her, like the Ayrshire Seagull Massacre, where she has this love poem to Aldi, the store and stuff. She's wild.
Oh, that's great.
Paired her with Mark Grest, who was an English teacher and like did all the battle rap stuff. He's very English, right? He's from Peterborough, and we give him Standard Habby as the sort of form, and so it's getting to see these real contrasts. But then there's like a similar undertone. They're both very funny writers. They're very engaging. So the hope is then when you pair that to the visuals, that it's something that people that wouldn't be fans of poetry will kind of get caught.
Yeah. Have you done those changes yourself? You know, everything that you've set people as a form. Have you ended up writing your own things?
So we did a pilot of the return to form. So the initial pilot was there's 4 of us involved in I Am Loud. And so we kind of broke it up, and I did an ekphrastic poem based off of a very old piece of cinema. It's the black and white silent film with the moon, where they go to the moon, and I can't remember the French name of it. So I did that one, and then with season 1, when the season wrapped, we were going into National Poetry Writing Month, where you're supposed to write a thing a day. And what we did instead was we did a thing a week. And so we used the 5 forms we had done and did that through NaPoWriMo. So we had to do them all eventually. And that's got me very scared, because I have NaPoWriMo this year. I'm probably going to have to do them all, and there are some I really don't want to do. I don't want to write a palindrome poem. No, thank you. It looks hard.
Yeah, I think you did the right thing doing one a week. I feel like I always enter like April and I'm like, this will be the year. And I think this year I did the most I've ever done, but I only did like 7 poems maybe, which is still, it's way more than like the 2 that I've managed before, but it's not a single like it's not a poem a day. That's just so many poems.
It's the thing, we're very like, our whole aim is to catch people that are new to it, right? Like someone once described us as the pop music of poetry, and I liked that, because I was like, it's a gateway thing, right? You need something that crosses the gap between niche art form and, oh, hey, no, we recognize this. So we use a lot of music, we use a lot of like comedy, hosting techniques and stuff to try and like smooth the rough edges of poetry. And I think when you get something like NaPoWriMo, what we're trying to do is that's, for people who have writing practice, go do NaPoWriMo, do it every day. But we're looking at people who are maybe interested in poetry and have never kind of written one and don't know where to start. Like, okay, well, don't try and do a poem a day. That's wild. Like, start somewhere else. So that was the kind of idea. We did a series of podcasts where we would, set out a challenge, and then we would chat about it, and we would share our work. And the hope is that people would kind of, especially during the pandemic, like, one of the things I miss most about poetry was the after gig chat, where you would sit and hang out and shoot breeze and talk about what you liked and what you didn't, what you're writing, ideas that have come up, and like that all kind of went away. So we tried to do these kind of podcasts to fill that gap a little bit, I guess, which was fun.
Because I think with I'm not a novelist, so I can't speak for them, but I feel like with novelists, it's such a kind of like, you are in your own world all of the time, whereas poems, because they're so much shorter and so much like I expect so much easier to sort of manage than an entire book. There's something just much more communal about poetry, I find. And I think if novelists are sitting in a room and they're talking about the novels, it's going to be, there's so much explaining to do, whereas like a poem, it's just, here it is in a few sentences, and this is my experience. So I've really missed that as well, actually. It's it's just such an important part of the process, I think.
Having spent a lot of time around comics, I feel that the poetry scene feels in a lot of ways much more like the comedy scene than the rest of the literature scene. Like especially if you're a deliberately spoken word poet, right? That's where you want to be doing gigs. Like it has so much more in common with that because you have the shared venue space, you have people doing developing, especially you go to lots of open mics and stuff, you see the same people performing, you see
Yeah.
them refine their act, which is a very um, live thing. You don't get to see the editing process of your favorite novelist. And so I think it's much more akin to stand-up comedy in that way.
Yeah. And what's kind of the reaction been to the return to form series? Like from if you had like poets, spoken word poets that you know and who haven't, yet been invited to do their own sort of get involved? Has it been, people like you were saying that haven't really had any formal poetry education, have never even written their own poem? Have they sort of come to you or tweeted you or whatever it is and been like, thank you, got a poem now?
Yeah, it's been like because you have these ideas and you think it's a good idea, but by the time you've spent 6 months kind of workshopping it, and then the funding application, and then waiting for that to come through, and then you start working, like you forget the joy of the idea. And so that's my favorite thing is when you're stressed with it and putting things out and trying to get these videos ready and working with all the people that are involved, and especially with the remote nature of doing it, like that end delivery where a bunch of people, got a lot of folk kind of commenting, being like, "Oh, I had no idea how to write a sestina, and now I've given it a go, and it's not as hard as I thought." And you're like, "Perfect." And the thing that is bigger for me is poets, because poets are stingy with their praise, and poets you got to earn it. And so, like when a lot of like poets hit me up to be like, "This is really cool. These look amazing." I was really touched by it. In fact, one of the people on this year's lineup is a fantastic poet called Kate Tuch. But I didn't really know Kate. She's much more kind of literary based. Like I'd seen some of her stuff and like heard her mentioned in a few conversations, but slightly separate worlds. And she hit me up because she was friends with Tawana Holy, who was in the first season, and she left me like this lovely WhatsApp voice message, just being like, "This is what we need more of," and people, breaking down those barriers between page and stage, and I'm just so
Yeah.
pleased for it. And so it was really nice because when we came to do season 2 and we were writing a funding app, like I hit her up to be like, "Could you do a letter of support just to like your genuine reaction?" And so then we got to invite her to take part in season 2, which was lovely. So I'm very excited for that one as well. She's doing the Renga with Vex and Imogen Sterling, so that's going to be very
Wait, what was
cool.
she doing the Renga?
So yeah, Renga is where it's cut pairs. So two people write a poem, you take it in turn to kind of go. I think it's haiku, limerick, like that.
Wow.
And it's supposed to. There's lots of weird rules about Rengas, like if you want to go that far to do with seasons and time and stuff. But we kind of left it a bit looser for them. But essentially, we've got 3 of them, and so there will be 3 Rengas in which 2 of them take part in 2.
Yeah.
So it's a great little trio for them.
Yeah, like a little
So we
Renga
have the one
triangle.
which is we have the one which is Harry Baker, who's doing the contrapuntal, and he's just doing that by himself because the nature of contrapuntal is
Yeah.
2 poems in one. Um, so yeah, we had one solo and one trio. So.
I love that. That sounds really cool. Yeah, because this is, I think people expect form to be, really quite prescriptive, like here is all the meters you need, here's all the rhymes you need. But it is really, I don't know, there are just really fun things like that, like a Renga I've never come across, but I'm like, that actually sounds like just a fun exercise to do.
Yeah, the weirdest bit was when I asked Kate to take part and then pitched her the Renga, she was like, "Well, that's funny. I've just spent the summer doing a Renga group
No way.
message with another poet we know," and I was like, "Well, perfect. You've got the experience in."
Yeah, she's got form. That's great.
But it's great, and like what I really enjoy is then we work with a filmmaker, Perry Johnson, who's been a long-term member of I Am Loud and like has been kind of integral to what we've done, and is very, very, very skilled filmmaker. So getting him not only in that capacity, but someone who properly understands poetry to like really pay attention to it. Like if you look at the individual form graphics, like they reference their own form. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
images, as much as they're abstract, they structurally make sense to the form, and Perry has an understanding of them.
It's
So
really
like
interesting.
that's represented through the final videos as well. and we're doing some very exciting stuff. There's going to be a 360-degree kind of digitally constructed video where you'll be able to kind of move the screen around and see different things by the viewing. And that's where something goes from being, oh, we couldn't do it in a live space, so we're doing this way, to being, no, you could only do it this way. That's the point of it. And I think there's something, good to that.
I love that idea that, you know, all the graphics and all the kind of iconography represents, that feels like proper little Easter eggs. It feels like, you know, you're watching an episode of Loki or something and you're just like, oh my gosh, what's the truth? Like, that's really, really cool.
And it was great because we've worked with Perry for so long. It wasn't even like, hey, if I did a brief, could you try and, like, he did it for season 1 when he sent me drafts through of the poster images. I was like, oh, these are themed. He was like, yes, because I'm very skilled at what I do. And I was like, yeah, good.
Just picking up on something you said a little while ago about kind of like the page and the stage, because that's something I found as well, you know, is like a lot of my work now, I've got sort of 2 forms of it. I've got like a version that I perform and I know like the rhythm of it, I know the music of it. And then I'm like, oh, this doesn't quite work on the page. So I've kind of adapted it a bit, but that took me so long to kind of work out how to do. And I feel like there's still less now, but there's still that kind of impression that if you're a performance poet, if you're a spoken word poet, you will not work. You know, you cannot like get published in a magazine. You can't sort of get into anthologies because what you do is kind of its own beast in a way. And do you think that's the case still? Do you think that's easing?
It's such a funny, because it's like that class of it. My personal thing is, I think performance poets should work hard to be good writers, and I think people who write, who have the intention to read it out loud, even if that's not as a performance poet, but if you tend to recite your poetry, then learn how to perform it better. And like then you'll get a happy middle ground. I do think that as someone, like, my writing practice has changed a lot, right? Like when I first started, it was very focused, very spoken wordy. And as I've like grown as a poet, I kind of have more of an appreciation that some pieces, not even that they're not for live performance, that they're just, I find it difficult to put them in a set or find the right spot for them in a live setting, right? Doesn't mean they couldn't be used, just a bit harder to fit. And then they're, you know, you go, well, is that a page poem? And you go, I don't know. I think taking poems written for the intention of being performed, where the performance is integral to the poem. I have a poem called Insomnia, and it's about me kind of slowly losing the ball, and I collapse at the end of the poem. The poem has none of that energy and none of that kind of final crescendo if I'm not on a stage. Yeah. So like that is a performance poem. I think more people should be willing to like play between the edges of that. It's you know, if you're a guitarist, you know, if you play guitar, why wouldn't you learn to play, you know, rock and roll and classical? Because then you have range, right? It's like, not everyone wants to do both, sure, but that's where I kind of fit in. I don't think people should argue that is my big thing, or think one of them is lesser. Because for me, like, it's easy to go spoken word is simpler, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's not as nuanced. And you go, well, sure, but you got to think about what the point in poems are, which if you are a poet as a job, then the point of your poem is for someone to enjoy it. And who's going to enjoy a very complex, wordy poem when they have no time to reprocess it? The spoken word poem has to be understandable in the time it takes to hear it. It has to be engaging and performative. It has to be able to speak to a whole crowd of people without the ability to reread. A page poem has to be layered and work in both a sort of like a general capacity, but then a specific focused capacity. It needs to have longevity in a way. A spoken word poem it can't be changed. It has to be finessed before it's put out in the world. You know, they both have different structures around them. So I think it's unfair to look at spoken word and be like, that's lesser, when a bunch of the people saying that couldn't do it. You know, like it is what it is.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a good point about the language, because I know sort of when I started focusing more on kind of like finessing things on paper, finessing, putting form into it, whatever you want to call it, my language got more complicated because I work as a journalist, so I'm used to kind of like the mantra if you work in broadcast is like you just need simple language. It needs to be straight to the point and you need to just get over what you're trying to say. You can have like paint beautiful pictures, but just in simple words. So I'm now sort of like having to kind of relearn all these like really fancy words for different things like nature and stuff, because people will be able to go off and like look it up and have the time to properly sit with it. Whereas if I was just throwing it out there, when I was in the middle of a piece and never repeated the word, people would be like, it would just be lost.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's the joyous thing about poetry is it's very, very hard to define, and people like to say what isn't poetry, and I get very annoyed about that because no one has given me a straight definition that is like, oh yeah, no, that is it, that ever. And I've been doing this a while. For me, it's when I look at it, I go, it's saying the way I approach poems is say something big in its simplest and prettiest form. And that's what I try and do. I try and take a big idea or a big feeling or a big moment, and I try and tell the story of it in the simplest, prettiest way. And like, that's not for everyone. And it's not even what I do all the time. Sometimes I want to do something funny, or I want to do something scary, or I want to do something specific. But like, I think when you get bogged down in like, okay, what is a poem? And then what is a performance poem? What is a page poem and stuff? It's like I don't think most people care about any of that. I think most people, like, I always think like Macklemore, right? A lot of his songs, number one hits, and they're spoken word poems, if you ask me. But like, do you need to categorize it as that? No, call it a song and have millions of people enjoy it rather than calling it something that you're very specific about, and then it gets lost in the argument, right?
Yeah. The way I sort of describe myself as a poet, I'm like, if I could sing, I would be a singer-songwriter. I can't sing at all. So I'm like, I'm a poet and I write my songs as poems or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And like some people's style wouldn't work for that. I mean, the rant poets or like, someone who's doing crazy pun poems and stuff, they're not very lyrical. But like if that's the way you do it, that's the way you write, then like that's the thing to do. And no one should ever be like, not poetry. Like it's why I hate people that rag on like Insta poets and stuff as well, because they're like, it's not very, and you're like, it's not very what? Like it's not very you. That's your problem. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's maybe because I'm not very educated about like poetry, right? Like I came from a performance background. The first poets I enjoyed were people who tricked me because I didn't realize they were poets when I enjoyed them. Like Scroobius Pip and Mark Grist and folk like that. It's I think sometimes a better way to go. I think people that are very hypercritical of, it's like the people that go, I don't like dance music. And you're like, well, all of it? You've heard all of it? Right, okay, great. Super duper. If you don't like insta poetry, or you don't like spoken word poetry, or North American slam style or whatever, that's fine. But don't brand it as, having no worth, I guess.
Yeah. I think it is ultimately about, I think you're right, it's about tricking people that, had poetry in school, like maybe one lesson in like year 7, or how to do a poem that's like really quite awful for GCSE and has no like actual modern resonances, because this is it, is like everybody I speak to, like all my friends who I'm just like, yeah, I do poetry. They're just like, oh God, it's so boring. Oh, I hate it so much. And I'm like, yeah, but you hate what you did in school. So
yeah.
Let's just, throw
I had
you.
a thing. I used to do a collab poem with a buddy of mine when we first started like poets. It was called Big Love, and it's a two-hander, so it's both of us on stage, and it was essentially about why women should date fat guys, and it was just just a piece of nonsense. It was just supposed to be funny, and like it was loose, right? There were pieces of rhyme and bits of sound stuff that worked, and collab refrain lines and stuff. It was fine. Someone was like, quite a prominent poet was like, that's not a poem, and I was like, I mean, but people clapped though, didn't they? And like we built an audience here, and it was based off us having fun and being a bit strange with it. So like maybe the quieter poets who can't generate that audience or that kind of excitement for themselves could like give us less of a hard time and just enjoy the fact that they get to perform at the fun gig. I mean, it's that thing. People want to jump on your stuff, but like I don't know. I always think the audience are the most important people. They have, whoever that is. If that's a person reading your book or a Friday night crowd who want to have a laugh and a drink, and so don't really want you to stand there and read sonnets about flowers, right? Like it's who you're aiming the stuff at. Not that sonnets about flowers don't have merit, but like pick your moment.
Yeah, there's a time and a place for a sonnet about flowers, and most open mic nights probably aren't the time or the place.
But then just like a free form kind of poem where you break character and chat to the audience in the middle of it and then go back to what you're doing, like I've seen Buddy Wakefield do, doesn't work for return to form, because that's about showing two specific things. And that's what we've always tried to, it's kind of what return to form is about in a way. It's being like, there's a lot of people who want to do something very specific, and we're kind of all about doing like whatever you fancy. And so it's trying to show the, like return to form is really that when you're going the difference between page and stage. I'm like, it was trying to show that, going, write good poems that are well thought out, not because they have form, but because you put in the time and effort and been paid to do it, and make it look pretty and make it enjoyable for an audience to watch, make it educational for writers who want to take it on. Do all of that at once, because everyone else can. Like,
so just moving on ever so slightly. So, I mean, obviously, what you guys do is multimedia in a way. You were talking about that digital project, which is sort of 3D. You've obviously got performance nights, you've been doing the podcast, you've got the digital series going on. But, one thing obviously at the heart of I Am Loud is the spoken word element of it. And I know you guys were back at the Fringe sort of in person for the first time for like a year and a half recently. How was that after so long away?
It was amazing. Like genuinely, I got to open, like usually our host, Mark, always hosts our slams. And so I got to kind of kick it off. You'd be the kind of first person back on that stage. And I closed our last show, said goodbye to the crowd, February 2020. And then, we weren't back until August 2021. And oh man, amazing. Just what an absolute buzz. And what was so nice was like there were new people in the crowd.
Good.
We did 9 nights. So we did 4 nights.
Okay.
With 2 shows each night. And then we did a 9th night, a 9th show that was the slam to close it out. And it was just, we got to book some absolutely tremendous poets. We got to like have really good audiences, and so many new. I always ask at the night, like give us a cheer if it's your first time, and the majority of the audiences it was their first time, which was great. Like that's so nice to see that you can still find new people, especially because we didn't know what this Fringe was going to be like. The Fringe is normally a huge thing for us. This was our 7th year. It would have been our 8th if it hadn't been for last year. So this was year 7, and normally we do upwards of 20 shows, so somewhere between 23 and 26 shows in the month. And so I normally start putting our Fringe show together, talking to the program manager at the Storytelling Centre. I normally start doing that latest February, and then this year it was July. So that was exciting. But we got some great poets, and we put on our show, and lovely reviews. The audiences seemed really happy. Poets sold a bunch of books, which I always take as a good sign. It was huge for us, and you could tell how much it meant to the poets. Like I think all of those poets would have done those gigs for free if we had asked them, because they were just like, yes, I'm so down for shows again. And then it's quite worked out well doing the back-to-back shows. Because all the first shows were great, but it gave them a chance to really enjoy the second show, because after most people it was their first show back, and so they've not gigged in
such a good point
or whatever. So they got all that nervous energy in the first one, and then the second one was like, okay, I'm back.
It was like, this is the return, this is me back in action. Because it is like, I haven't yet performed because yeah, just I feel like in Glasgow, not a lot of the open mics have kind of really kicked off again the way they used to. Um, but I was thinking about it the other day, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I think I'm actually going to be really nervous when I have to get back up and start doing it again, because it is, it's like one thing being in a room full of people again, that's like its own slightly nervous energy, but then actually having to perform in front of them, I'm like, oh my gosh.
See, I love hosting. That's the thing. I wasn't nervous at first because I love hosting because it's just like chat. And your
Yeah.
whole point as a host is like to make the acts look good and to like be pals with the audience. And I like to be quite self-deprecating because I'm like, oh, don't worry about me. You're gonna love these people, right? And like really put it on them. And so it's quite chill hosting. And so I didn't realize because it wasn't until our last night really that I then did a set. And I freaked out because I hadn't thought about it the whole month. I was just doing hosting and like, oh, this is great fun. And then it was like, it's your turn. Oh no. And I had to put together a set and figure out what I was going to say in between stuff. It was terrifying.
Yeah. Seven runs at the Fringe though, that's so cool. I hadn't yeah, I
It's
didn't realize it'd
as
be
well.
quite as long.
Our Fringe history is crazy, man, because it's you're saying open mics are back and stuff. I totally get why. We wouldn't have been back had it not been for our absolutely like privileged position to be having such a good relationship with the Storytelling Centre.
Yeah.
Scottish Storytelling Centre is an absolutely incredible venue. Like they do so much to support the local literature scene, storytellers and poets who don't often get good spaces with beautiful sound and like all the wonderful things that come with the Storytelling Centre. And like they took a real punt on us. 2014, a high-profile comedian was supposed to be doing a run at the Storytelling Centre as a kind of like hosting speakeasy thing, Joe Caulfield, and they dropped out last minute. At the same time, we were going to do our first Fringe run. We were going to do it as part of the Free Fringe, do like a week-long thing at the County Head. The venue dropped through in July. I happened to bump into my old drama tutor from youth theatre on the Royal Mile, and I was moaning about how like our thing had fallen through. And he went, "Oh, I'm got 14 dates at the Storytelling Centre for a thing I was supposed to produce. I could pitch you guys." And we were like, "Sure." The Storytelling Centre took a risk because they had the gap.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have got that otherwise. And then we got in and it went amazing. Like because we had real groundswell support. And so like we smashed those 14 days. And so every year after that, we just kind of more and more. And then we moved our monthly season to the Storytelling Centre as well to kind of make that that's our home. We're doing work currently with them shooting their Scottish International Storytelling Festival. So we're going to be doing all the digital production for that in October and stuff. So yeah, it's been an amazing relationship. And it's the only reason like we could count on coming back because they have the structure in place to kind of do all the protocols to keep people safe, like that we wouldn't be able to do at Banshee Labyrinth.
And have you seen the Storytelling Centre? I've never actually been in it, but I just know what amazing stuff they do, and I'm sort of performing there actually as part of that international festival in October. And I'm so excited because I did an online thing with them earlier this year, but online gigs are so different. And
yeah, it's weird.
It's I'm so glad that I was able to do it because it means I'm not entirely rusty, but it is just so strange. And it's just, you log off and it's just like your screen, like your just face is reflected in your own screen. And it's like so disconcerting and just disorienting.
It was my favorite part of the Fringe was the last night we did the slam because the rest of the time we were doing the two shows. It's a big, it doesn't seem like a lot, like 2 hours, but when it's a show, that's a lot. And then by the time you've got the get in and the get out stuff, you would be leaving back at 11. And so no one was kind of keen for Fringe drinks or anything like that. So we kind of saved it up. And the last night was the Saturday, and we did the slam. And it was only, kind of hour and a half, and then we were done. So we were out by 9:30. And all the poets, it was amazing. Almost everyone came and we went for drinks. And it was just so incredible to be sitting in a room with like some poets I didn't know at all. Someone who did the very first ever live poet show back in 2014, who I've not seen in years, who came up specifically for the slam, and everyone in between, and everyone just sat and was like chatting about how the gig went, being back and all that stuff. It was incredible. It was the absolute highlight of the Fringe. It was amazing.
And have you seen like changes over the years? Because yeah, I know you're saying like the 2014 run, the first run went amazing, but have you seen changes to kind of like the reception of spoken word poetry and of your shows during the Fringe or outside the Fringe in the last 7 years? How do you think it's changed? Because I don't know, it feels to me, and I might just be completely wrong in saying this, but it feels like poetry is getting a bit more, I don't know if popular is the right word, but it's becoming just a bit more, you know, and it's partly because of the Insta poets, right? It's partly because of people like Rupi Kaur who are doing what they're doing, and they're bringing new people in. But it just feels like, yeah, poetry in Amanda Gorman, you know, at the inauguration, it just feels like it's a bit more of a moment.
It's the thing. I always, again, I always forget where quotes come from, but someone once said to me, "There's no art held so highly and so lowly as poetry." Like it is there's an official poet of the Queen. There is poetry for state functions, for great wars and great, you know, all that stuff. And then it is like the smallest section in every festival. It is the lowest funded by every central funded organization. Is, you know, I mean, it's just this weird, like, there's no in between. You're either poet laureate or like a loony at the open mic. It's just, that's the thing. I think I've been here a while. Like I only started writing in 2013. There's been people that have been kicking about the Scottish scene longer than I have, but the Scottish scene itself probably isn't. You know, it's spoken word scene is still, you know, fairly fresh compared to other scenes. Mm-hmm. There are peaks and troughs, and I think it's that catch-22 thing. I think there isn't a lot of opportunity in poetry in Scotland, and so people stop pursuing it or they go somewhere else, and that stops it reaching a kind of max capacity. I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about writing and performing poetry and maybe less passionate about watching poetry. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think there are difficulties. I think the scene always has the potential to be incredible. I've never been to any poetry night and not seen someone who I was like, they're amazing. I've been to some really bad poetry nights, but there's always been at least one saving grace, right? Something that was worthwhile in it. And I don't think any art form has the range and capacity that poetry has, because anyone can do poetry. You don't need a band, you don't need an expensive piece of kit, you don't need transport to the place, you don't need people to do it with, you don't need anything other than the want to say something. And it makes it the most accessible art form in the world. And like, there is never going to be a time people don't want stories or connection or a way to process their own nonsense through the filter of someone else's like refined thought, right? And I think you see anyone who encounters poetry in a moment without preconception, without the thought that this is going to be a stale poetry night. If you present them something that is not what they expect, they gravitate towards it. I've been running live poet shows for like 7 years now. Almost every show I've ever done, someone will come up to me after and went, "I didn't know this existed. I didn't know poetry could be like that." And that's amazing and heartbreaking, because not just in Scotland, across the country, in the UK, there's a plethora of talent. Like, I have showcased hundreds, if not at this point, maybe thousands of poets, and like so many of them have gone on to be musicians or actors or not artists at all. And it's like, it damages my mind. I'm like, why don't we have a slam circuit? Why don't we have constant amazing poetry nights? And it's because no one has the capacity to make it happen. And because no one does, it's like, it just keeps going round and round. I think currently the Glasgow scene has a huge grassroots vibe, but that lasts so long before people are tired of hearing the same people at the same gigs, because no one filters off to the professional level. I think Edinburgh had an amazing scene, and because that wasn't there, a lot of people left, and it was a very international scene, and there wasn't the opportunities here to keep them. And so, like, what I'm trying to do, what I Am Loud is trying to do, like what we're very hopeful for, is that there is a level of professionalization in the scene that gives people that thing to track up to. Like, and that would be my hope for coming back from this, is that we've got big plans for, you know, a live event series and things like that. And it's hopefully we see the uptick in the scene, people who've been spending the last 16 to 18 months in their house, maybe writing some things down. Let's get those folk out to the open mics. You know, I mean, that's the hope.
Yeah. That's a perfect note to end it on, I think. Slightly.
Sorry, I'm a ranter.
No, I love it. It was all perfect. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And if people are watching or listening, where can they find you? Where can they find Am Loud?
They can find us at I Am Loud or at I Am Loud Pro on most things. If you search I Am Loud, we pretty much come up fairly quickly, or Loud Poets. I would suggest heading to the YouTube page, which is the place we put out everything. All of our podcasts come with video versions, and it is where Return to Form is going to be coming out. And we have some incredible names, both from the Scottish scene and the English scene, like Joel Taylor, Mark Grist, Harry Baker, are all doing it, which is wild to me. So yeah, it should check out the stuff. It's all good. Or come and see us whenever we're at the Storytelling Centre, because that's where we like to be.
Yeah,